Hello Year 10, welcome along to Term 3 Lesson 11, where we're going to be looking at a set design question from Blood Brothers. Before we start, I want to make it really clear that this set design question is not a 20-mark question, so at the end of your exam paper you get a choice whether to do an acting or performance question or a design question, which could be set design, costume design, or lighting and sound design. Now, this isn't that question. At the beginning of the exam, you get a 4-mark question, and so far we've done our 4-mark questions on costumes. Now, it could be that the 4-mark question is about set as well. It's a design question that is worth 4 marks. So it's really important that we have that in our mind, and I'm going to talk through with you today how we might answer a 4-mark question but not the 20-mark question. So I am going to ask you today to identify appropriate references for a 4-mark set design question. I'm going to ask you to identify appropriate success criteria within a model answer, and I'm going to ask you to look and highlight that for me. And then finally, I'm going to ask you to identify, describe and analyse appropriate set design references for a scene within Blood Brothers, and I'm going to ask you to have a go at doing a model answer of your own for today's main task. So, the resources that you are going to need are as follows. You're going to need your drama book or notepaper and a pen. You're going to need your copy of Blood Brothers, and you are also going to need a copy of the model answer that I sent to you with today's resources. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video now, go off and get those things and come back when you are ready. Wonderful. Okay, so as per usual, what we're going to do is we're going to start by thinking about set design, and I'm going to ask you to identify all of the different references that you might make when answering a set design question. So, as it says, don't just reference different elements of set design, but also talk about what the requirements of the question might be. So naturally you might talk about the colour or the materials. That is definitely a set design thing, but you might also want to, you will need to identify, what are the requirements of the question? What is the question likely to ask you to do? What can you remember about the 4-mark costume question, which you could apply to this answer also, because the structure of the question is likely to be very similar, even though it's asking you about set instead of about costume. So I'd like you to spend 5 minutes or less on this question. I'd like you to pause the video now. If you get to 5 minutes and you haven't quite finished identifying all of the references in a list or in the map, can you please come back to the video and we'll go through them together. Wonderful. So now in the box on the screen, you will see some of the things that you might make reference to when talking about set design. We're going to start off with this. You need to clearly reference specific items within your set design. So lots of answers that I see is that they talk about set design in a really broad scale, and they go, the condition of the room would be this, or this would be this, and you're speaking too generally. So let me give you an example. We're going to look at a question which focuses on a classroom in Blood Brothers within a comprehensive school. Now, if you described that classroom to me, you're getting marks for describing things, and that's great, but you're being too vague. So you could say the classroom is grey, it's morbid, it's in a bad condition. Brilliant, you're starting to get marks there, but then you could say, but the desk would be made of this kind of wood, this would be the material that was used, this would be the colour, this would be the age, this would be the condition. So you've kind of gone and you've filtered that downwards, and it's almost like an upside down triangle. So you start off with quite a broad description and you filter that down to something quite specific. So you need to make sure that you are referencing specific items within your set design, specific items, that's props or bigger pieces of set. You need clear descriptions of key items of set. So as I say, you need to talk about the condition, what it looks like, how it might feel, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that you could reference when describing it. So you could make references to the condition, the style, the size, the colour, the age, the materials of your props and set. You need to be making references to the social context of the production, and that will be clearly labelled within the exam question. You need an explanation of how your set communicates the circumstances of the scene or the production to the audience, but you also need to ensure your answer hits all of the elements and the requirements of the question. So it might be that your question asks you to link it back to the social status or the social class of your characters. That's okay. Most welcome to do that. You can talk about your analysis in a much wider sense, but your analysis should always be going back to that social status and that social class. Is it a composite or a discrete set, and why have you chosen that? And you can make reference to props as well as larger pieces of set. So, that is our list. I'm going to ask you to pause the video now if you need to add any additional ones to your map. Can you do that in a different colour, please? And pause the video now. Okay, so on your screen in front of you, you will see a question at the top of the screen. You will see some success criteria in a blue box to the right-hand side of the screen, but the screen is mainly filled with an example answer, and we're going to go through that now. So the question is, you are designing a setting for a performance of this extract. The setting must reflect the context of Blood Brothers set in a working class community in and around 1970. Describe your design ideas for the setting. It's going to be worth 4 marks. Now, the scene that we're looking at is the school scene with Linda and Mickey. It's where Mickey has an alteration with the teacher. It's where he kicks him out of the classroom because Mickey starts to make loads of noise, standing on the table, being a bit of a comedian. But we're focusing specifically on the props and the set. So, let's start. During the 1970s, the education system was still a tripartite system, with working class students likely attending comprehensive schools. Now, for those of you who don't know, a tripartite system was very popular within that time period. You, as a person, would go to one of 3 schools. It would be a grammar school for the most able, it would be a technical school if you were going to go into some kind of industry, and it would be comprehensive for what was likely to be the majority of the working class. And again, that seems very unfair now, but that was the way that it was, and comprehensive schools was kind of for everybody else who didn't fit into the technical or the grammar stream. These schools were underfunded and would appear tired, likely representing the economic situation in Liverpool at that time. And then I put in brackets, which was poor. Many dockhands were laid off, and the once positive economy in Liverpool was in decline. So what you can see there is a really nice introduction. I have the teacher placed upstage in front of the blackboard with individual wooden desks placed across the stage. The wooden desks would have been made of pine, a cheaper form of wood reflecting the financial difficulties of the time period. And moreover, the desks would be in a poor condition. The wood would be chipped, with carvings and graffiti clearly visible on all desks. This demonstrates that the students are not interested in their schooling and spend more time graffitiing their desks than listening. On Linda's desk, there would be a love heart carved into the desk, with Mickey's name in the middle of it, reflecting her feelings towards Mickey, and moreover, reflecting that she spends more time dreaming about Mickey than she does listening in class. This school would contrast massively to Edward's private school setting. Now, what I would like you to do is this. I would like you to go to your example, and I ask you to get that in front of you at the beginning of this video. So the example model answer, and I would like you to highlight in yellow where the candidate describes the set and props. I would like you in a different colour, and that could be green, for example, to analyse how the description demonstrates the meaning to the audience, so how it represents the circumstances of the scene, the play, the status, the social class. So we've got describe, we've got the analyse, and then where the candidate has made a reference to social context and how context has been included within this answer. Now, if you don't have the highlighting tool on your computer, then I'd just ask you to change the colour and have 3 different colours within your model answer. So this is very, very similar to the task that we did with the costume design question. So don't overcomplicate this. Just 3 different colours, identifying where the candidate has hit 3 different elements of the success criteria in that answer. And I'd like you to pause the video now. I'd like you to have a go at completing that. And then I'd like you to come back when that has been done. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have a go at going through the model answer together. And we're going to start off by just looking at the references to social context, which I think has been clearly made at the top of this answer. Excuse me. So, During the 1970s, the education system was still a tripartite system with working class students likely attending comprehensive schools. Brilliant. It's making that link back to it, and it's talking about how it's reflective of a working class community. The schools were underfunded, and this would likely appear tired, representing the economic situation in Liverpool at the time. So all I'm doing is I'm giving my understanding of the context. And actually, what I think the candidate has missed here is that instead of putting... So you will see that there's lots of yellow followed by lots of green, and then it changes back to yellow and green, so on and so forth. And what I would like to have seen is just a little bit of blue going on in there. So again, maybe we've got some elements there, but we'll talk about it in a minute. So we've got the blue right at the top of the screen. That is the context. It's been clearly hit. The mark for this question was 4 out of 4, so it's been clearly hit, even though it's not well integrated within the question, I would say. So let's move on to where the candidate goes. I would have the teacher placed upstage in front of the blackboard. Okay, you can absolutely make reference to that. Absolutely can talk about where things would be positioned and why. And then what we've got is here the description. With individual wooden desks placed across the stage, the wooden desks would have been made of pine. So again, I'm giving that description there. A cheaper form of wood, reflecting the financial difficulties of the time period. And I think that is probably a context reference, but also an analytical point. So that probably, if you reference that in the context colour, I would still accept that. And if you referenced it in the analysis colour, that's fine also. The candidate then goes back to describe, and he goes, the desks, or she goes, the desks would be in a poor condition. The wood would be chipped, with carvings and graffiti clearly visible on the desk. So clearly gone through there. And then we go back to the analysis. This demonstrates that the students are not interested in their schooling and spend more time graffitiing their desks than listening. And then we go back to the description. So on Linda's desk would be a love heart carved into the desk with Mickey's name in the middle of it. I think this is really clever, actually, because it's really linking back to the circumstances of the scene. And if possible, if you can talk about how, you know, this is appropriate because it would need to be in the scene or would reflect the character's personality in some way, I think that's really clever. And then it goes to talk about the analysis. So reflecting her feelings towards Mickey, and moreover reflecting the time that she spends daydreaming about Mickey opposed to listening in class. And then it goes on to talk about this would contrast massively to Edward's private school setting. And I think actually it would be nice to hear maybe a really small analysis of that comparison. But I think when you've got 4 marks, and you have to remember that actually this is meant to be one of the easiest questions in the exam. If you're spending 20 minutes of it, you're only getting 4 marks at the end of it. So I think that nice sentence is a good way to end it. I think it's making reference to another scene, but not talking about that is important because you just don't have time and the gains are not worth it. It's a 4-mark question. So I hope that that's been clear to you. I hope that you have a good understanding of what would be expected within that design question, and enough of an understanding for you to go through that and have a go at doing one by yourself. So the extract that you're going to be focusing on is pages 8 to 9 in your copy of Blood Brothers, and they start with the stage direction, Mrs. Lyon's house where Mrs. Johnston is working, to music is heard as Mrs. Johnston warily approaches the table. And that's the start and the end. And the question that I'm going to ask you is this. You are designing a setting for performance, or for a performance of this extract. The setting must reflect the status and the wealth of the Lyons family. You must include clear references to social context in your answer. Describe your design ideas for the setting. All I'm asking you to do is produce a response that is very similar to the response that you can see here. Okay, so it should be around the same length and around the same sort of detail. I want you to make sure that you are referencing appropriate props and set. So specific props and set. So remember what we said about that upside down triangle. You can start off with something quite vague, but you then need to talk about specific things that would be in the Lyons household. You need to analyse how your set and props reflect the wealth and status of the family. So we need to be hitting the criteria that talks about that within the question, because remember that was one of our points from our map earlier on. We've got to be talking about the requirements of the question, and we need to be making links between the set design and the context of the scene. So you can talk about industry at that time. We know that Mr. Lyons is a factory director. You could talk about the differences between the factory director and the factory workers and the contrast between the two scenes. You could talk about wealth. In that time, you could talk about the rise of capitalism. Use your context research to help you, and you've got that, and we looked at that, so do use that to help you. You don't have to do this blind, but I want this question to take you no longer than 10 minutes. I want you to make sure that you are hitting the description success criteria, the analysis success criteria, and the context success criteria. So 10 minutes or less. Remember, this really in the exam should take you 5 minutes, but it should be about the same length as the ones that we've been looking at today. So, good luck. Let me know if you have any questions about that, but as I say, no longer than 10 minutes, please. When you have completed it, I'm going to send you the due date and talk about how I want you to upload those resources. We use Microsoft Teams pretty regularly, but if you can't submit via Microsoft Teams, email is of course fine, and you need to only submit a copy of your 4-mark set design answer. I don't need to see your map and I don't need to see your annotations, just the answer. Okay, it's been wonderful speaking to you. I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Stay safe. Bye-bye.